Welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scott, and joining me this week, once again, sure, he can be a salty dog, but he's still a good egg. It's Brian. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Scott. Good evening to you.
And a good evening to you as well, Brian. As you know, and everyone listening knows, we are here to discuss I love saying this word. It's one of my favorite words in the English language for some reason. The penultimate episodes of both Succession and Barry. Oh, by the way, I was actually thinking about the idea of maybe doing them in separate podcasts next week. Then I said, nah. It's like, why? Will we be that much less tired by the time we get to one after the other? No. Anyway, so with no further ado, let's get our black suits on and bow our heads. Let's begin our look at Church and State, which, as I just mentioned, is the next to last episode ever of Succession. Now, in my mind, as I watched this episode, I kind of slid it next to last week's episode, not just because, that's the order of the episodes, but I also kind of looked at it oddly as almost like a two-parter for Roman. Much like that episode and the one prior to that one felt like a two-parter about Shiv and Tom. So I looked at it this way. So if America Decides, the previous episode, if that was the rise of Roman, well, Church and State is his fall. I see what I did there. Yeah. Rise and fall. I'm so smart. So, I mean, in this episode, it's really, although one could be really critical and say it's an almost unwieldy structure, I'm going to dismiss that. I really like the fact you can tent pole the beginning, the middle, and the end of the episode to see, like I just said, Roman's rise and fall in the episode. And that's kind of how I want to kick off the conversation about the episode, as opposed to just going specifically beat by beat throughout the entire one. Although we'll try to hit as many things, and you'll remind me about anything because we're going to bounce around a little bit here. Because if you think about the beginning, we start off with Roman. He's about as confident and cocky and as high on a cloud as he's ever been. He's practicing his eulogy, which may or may... I love that we're not really sure, is he actually going to pump himself up quite the way he's doing when he's talking to himself or not? I love the little asides to himself when he's mocking his siblings, as he's envisioning the reactions to his performance. When he says things like, see Shiv cry, see Kenny lie, see Roman the showman light up the sky. Although, I mean, I think you'll probably, I'm pretty sure you'll agree with me. When you're watching that at the very beginning, it's like, okay, it's inevitable. It's almost like you're guaranteeing he's going to be brought down just by the way he's acting and the way we're opening this episode, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I thought that, I thought he would flame out, and I thought it was, an intentional choice to say light up the sky, because he burns out like a phoenix in this episode, that he flew high and fast and headed towards the sun and crashed back to earth quickly.
Ah, yes. Icarus, the legend of Icarus comes true for Roman. Oh, it works for his name. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Because it's right. And again, as I spoke about the way they temple it, it's almost exactly, it's not quite, but it's almost exactly the middle of the episode, the midpoint of the episode, where that's when we see that all that pre-grieving, which he actually references once again, clearly never stuck. And Roman falters and fails on an epic scale. He's unable to give the eulogy. He's unable to comprehend that the body of his father is in that casket. He's unable to wrap his head around death itself. And what's fascinating about that entire stretch there is, we've talked before about how a show that many looked at when it first started as, Succession, they're all such horrible, unlikable characters. How do you watch that? And it's like, well, you could say that about a lot of the best shows, I always go to like Veep as an example and stuff like that. But he's really one of those characters that it almost surprises you when you feel sympathy for him based on the way he tends to treat other people, and has been, there's definitely been moments and references that have been made over the previous 3.5+ seasons, whatever. But this was the one where, I mean, I think only the more hardened souls weren't feeling something when we watched him kind of, from his fumfering up the pulpit to when he's down there with them. Yeah, I'm getting a little verklempt even remembering it right now, actually, because when he's literally sobbing, and and we realize, oh, it's all come crashing in now. The moment is now, and again, we've not seen this before in any form. We've seen the others have emotional meltdowns to some degree. We haven't seen it as much with him. We've seen him be angry. We've seen him be in denial. This is where it all just it hits, I think.
Yeah, he has been a sort of a brick wall the whole show, and when it tumbles down, everything he repressed comes out. It came out, and I think what really made us feel for him is seeing the depth of emotion that he hides behind sarcasm and just being a jerk, and knowing a lot of that's armor, and we see his armor, he's completely disarmed by the time that he gets up there. And I wondered, I think it probably would have been bad, but I wondered if you thought what Ewan said before, where he sort of told a little bit of their story, him and Logan's story, that if that made it even worse for Roman, that the preamble Ewan gives, or do you think he'd have flamed out that spectacularly anyway?
That's an excellent question. While I think it's likely he would have flamed out to some degree anyway, the Ewan eulogy, which I'll probably get more into a little bit later, absolutely knocks him off kilter. Because Roman is a man with a plan. He had a plan for how this entire day was going to go. He's had a plan since the night of, when they basically crowned Mencken president, essentially, on the network, and how everything was going to proceed from that point on. And when Ewan reveals those details about his father, reveals stories he never heard. None of them had ever known the things that they talk about, because the world, the first story is something clearly no one had ever heard. The thing referring to the sister is something that they've always hinted at on the show, but never revealed before, and to that degree. And I think those things, first the humanizing of Logan, and then the teardown of Logan, which you can't really refute, although they certainly were, the siblings certainly seemed to want to present the other side, as they kept saying. And I think that threw him. And let's face it, Ewan was also very well spoken how he went about things, and this isn't Roman's necessarily his thing, as they say. But I think the surprise or shock of that preceding him going up was never expected. The thought was, he's just going to go up there and do this and be the star of the show, so to speak, the showman that he had spoken about. So, now, if Ewan doesn't do that, does he go fine? I don't know. I think maybe it might be he starts off fine, but having that casket there, I still think something might have happened. but there's no way to know that. But in fact, but I do agree. I actually have to agree with the point that if Ewan doesn't do that, maybe it doesn't happen. Maybe I should actually walk that back. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Ewan doing that guarantees it happens.
I had the sense that Ewan held up a mirror to the crowd of Logan that I think the kids know in their heart of hearts is true. And with Roman idealizing Logan throughout the death process, and wanting to be triumphant and do all these things, I think you're right. It messed up the order, the sequence. I think all the factors had to be perfect for Roman to hit it out of the park.
Right.
And that throws it off to start with. But then to hear the humanizing things and basically the mortal frailties of his dad, and then to have to go up and try to refute that, I think just overwhelmed him. And looking at the casket, and and a thought I had too is when Ewan got up and spoke, and even when he gets up and they don't want him to, and they try to stop him, you can't stop him. I thought, there is something in the DNA of that family that even Ewan is a force of nature that couldn't be stopped. And he commanded the room, and no one was going to make him stop. And everyone, by the time he was done, everybody was listening.
Right.
So, I mean, there's something in the those brothers and their story and their DNA that was special.
So, and to finish to get to the third pillar of the temple thing I had mentioned, when we get to the final moments of the episode, and this is after Ken has rather bluntly and even in a Logan-esque way, either one thinks of it as being intentional or unintentionally, but still completely cruel when he lays into Roman about just how he has failed. Not in terms of just the eulogy, but perhaps his entire master plan that put Mencken in the Oval Office because the guarantee of tanking the Gojo deal, etc. That's when Roman goes out. He goes out into what we can call like the unkind wilderness of New York City with what's going on at this point in time, because the streets are now being overrun by like the marchers and the protesters. It's a storm that he played not just a massive part in creating. You could actually lay the blame at Roman's feet, quite frankly. And if, as Kendall said about their father earlier, in his eulogizing, so to speak, if his father could at some point in time or whatever relate to the common person, because there's something that Ken says about, whatever room he was in, he was comfortable, so to speak. So that way he could find a way to relate to the common person, the poor person, perhaps from their own beginnings even. The person that may feel the harsh brunt of the different policies and laws that could be enacted by someone like a Mencken, someone teetering on the edge of neo-fascism from what we've heard. Roman, however, has shown very little to no ability to relate or understand or really care about such people. And he certainly has shown maybe he cares far less about them than even his own siblings. And so when he goes out, he's raging against them. He's raging against not the machine like they are, the masses, like, the people themselves. And only he goes into the crowds only to be smacked and pummeled by the masses as they are surging forward. And it almost, there's a moment there, it reminds me of when you see people a criminal who, suicide by cop kind of a thing. You kind of wonder, is he doing this is he going out there because he knows he's going to be beaten down? He doesn't act like it, but how do you're a rather, diminutive dude, whatever, how do you not realize you're going to get punched and smacked and probably trampled even? But the way I looked at it, I'm sure that even as the episode closes and when we come back to him in the final episode, he's certainly probably suffered some bumps and bruises. I would be shocked if it's something more than that, but I've been wrong about a few things, so I could be wrong about that as well. The little weird suicide by cop analogy, I wonder if this act is as close as we would get to the equivalent of a potential suicide that we had talked about on a previous podcast. Maybe that's kind of, what fills that blank, so to speak, because it is, if nothing else, it's a very clear reckless disregard for his own life, because of the emotions and trauma that he's going through at this point in time.
Yeah, he's spinning out of control, and a thought I had after I watched this episode too was at various points this season, all the siblings have had some connection with a partner, a former partner, and Roman this season without Jerry, like, doesn't really have anyone. It's just him. And we even see Kendall have interactions with Rava, and they have something in common. They have their kids. We have Shiv and Tom. Obviously, Connor has Willa. Like, Roman doesn't really have anybody. And I thought, as you look at the funeral, there's like a whole row of women there for Logan. If Roman's funeral happened, like, who would be there for him? Like, the one model he dated, and it's really kind of a sad existence that he's in, and he really doesn't have anybody.
Right. I mean, yeah, that was your reference, the woman he was with that he didn't actually ever have true intimacy with, if I recall, which only spoke to how kind of screwed up he is and has been, and maybe even speaks to the supposed deviancy that his father saw in him, and maybe he even views himself that way as a result.
Right.
The closest you got in this episode, as far as is referencing Jerry, we did have that moment during when he breaks down and he's sobbing. We get a quick, well, maybe not that quick. I don't know how long it lingers, but we do see Jerry's reaction to it. And it's subtle, but you can still, I think we still at least read into the reaction that she's at least concerned, because, she's human. Even if there's things that are said and done later, but she's not one of those people. It's interesting watching what he's doing before that. There's that moment, I don't know if it's a moment, when he's kind of circulating around before the eulogy. And it's interesting how he's already trying to assert himself, and it's not really going that well. He's kind of sort of rebuffed by Frank, and the rest of them aren't really. He's still in that mode where people don't quite take him seriously, despite the fact that of the major part he played in what happened with Mencken just the other night. Whether these guys even know about that, who knows? And then when you go to post meltdown, I mean, even Frank is nicer about it than Carl is, who's very much enjoying it as it's already about to go viral. It's the takedown of Roman is pretty complete, as he does it to himself, and it's such a sad moment. And now he's an object of ridicule. You see Mencken's face, and reacting, whatever. You see everyone, it's like this won't just simply go away. And, I'm a bit of for myself personally, I sometimes I do believe in karma, and one can't help with Roman more so than any other character. There's a bit of a karmic justice here. I mean, even within this episode, not just how he speaks in the very beginning, but think about the car trip. And because there's that moment in the car trip, especially when Shiv finally reveals that she's pregnant, and the way he speaks to her and the way he acts, which she does not find fun. There's nothing funny about it. It's like, okay, you're continuing your tendency to go too far, and maybe it's kind of like he doesn't care to read the room, because he's entertaining himself, which look. I've been that guy. I was like that in my 20s. We've seen that with characters in different fictional things where it's like people, as long as they're entertaining themselves, they don't care how they might hurt others. But Roman is really that way. So it's kind of a devastating episode for him.
It is, and the way he reacts to Shiv, and he sort of has one setting, and that's it, and he doesn't really adjust or adapt. He's always acerbic and goes too far, but what happens to him is so devastating. And I think, sort of the coup de grace is, you see Matson like gets to tamp on his grave, pardon the pun, but Matson gets to belittle him, which after their last interchange, I think most of us would say Roman may have gotten the best of Matson then. Matson gets the last word.
Right. Yeah, that's true. So let's circle back to the funeral now, because you had already mentioned what Ewan had spoken about. Because if you move beyond, Roman ending not with a bang but a whimper, we have three perspectives that are given at the pulpit at the church. And what's interesting about them, in my view, is that they all share a few things in common, even if they're still so very different. Each one acknowledges the monster or the brute that Logan was. Each one is pretty damn honest, even brutally honest, in fact. I mean, the one that we all forgot about, and we've already talked about a bit, but the family didn't, because boy, Greg was supposed to prevent it from happening. Like that would even be possible. Again, it's Ewan, it's Logan's brother. Again, let's give a played perfectly, even a bit righteously, but perfectly, once again, by James Cromwell. This dude's come a long way since the days of him being like Stretch Cunningham on All in the Family. That's for the old people out there. You all thought I was going to reference Babe? No. He was Archie's friend. Now, in many ways, his speech, what we talked about a little bit before, it's a perfect composition. You get the World War II horrors from a child's perspective. So he's sharing an anecdote likely few, if any, have ever heard before. Their shared experience of something hellish. It establishes their bond of brothers. And like we had said before, that instantly humanizes Logan. He goes further when he talks about Logan's belief of somehow thinking he was responsible for their sister's polio and therefore eventual death, which shows Logan, there's at least a side to him that could be impacted by love, that could be racked by guilt, that could be, tinged at least with regret, which is something we don't tend to see with most of his actions as throughout the years of his life. Because the rest of what Ewan does, to me, that's Ewan taking a pickaxe to, let's not imagine a big statue of Logan and just bringing it crashing down like the statues of dictators and despots that we've seen over the years. And he goes on about how the acts and influences of Logan Roy were probably even worse than any dictator I was referencing, because it's also how he looked at the world, how he burned so much of it and mocked the rest. So like you were saying already, it's something that it starts one way, ends another. It's in many ways pretty devastating. Obviously, there's the impact it had on Roman, but you can see the stricken faces of all the Roy children, because there's the acknowledgement that, you can't deny this, but still, this can't be the only thing that's presented here. That's not what this day is supposed to be. But it's something that it's funny when we were anticipating this funeral and we knew that someone was going to speak. I have to admit, speaking for myself at least, never occurred to me that Ewan, the brother, would speak, even though, of course he should. He's his if someone's going to speak, this scene was. We talked once about Succession being unpredictable, and then I realized to a certain degree, it's well, sometimes it's predictable, but we're just not thinking that way, and they present it in a way where it's so good you think it's oh wow, that's. It's well, it could still be predictable, but good. We should have predicted he was going to speak. We just didn't think of it because we were so focused on, is it going to be Roman? Is Kendall going to say something? It's a really great, powerful moment for someone who's only appeared in a handful of episodes. So I was very impressed by it.
Yeah, I think what Succession does so well is it makes you forget. It takes you into this world that's so outside your experience. It's this world of ultra rich, powerful people that we sort of forget that there are certain rules that apply to everyone. And when those rules are applied, like, hey, at a funeral, the family speaks, and that includes brothers, sisters, maybe a mother or father. that we're so into the world of the characters that we forget the normal rules that apply to everyone. And so what seems like a surprise is just the filter we've had on watching these characters in their world gets jerked back to reality for a second. And it's a little jarring, but in a good way, and used in a way to make a wonderful point. And I thought, I liked even at the end, Ewan said, something to the effect of like, like maybe he didn't do his best or whatever, or he could have done better. And he said, maybe I could do better. Like basically says, like what Logan had in him, we all have in us. But Logan was extremely effective at making the world a smaller, uglier place.
Yeah, what's really striking about his speech is more towards the close of it, where it moves beyond whatever horrendous impact he had on the world based on, decisions made that that impacted policies and countries and leaders and whatever. It's when he goes on about the meagerness that he saw in people and himself. That part is really a much more personal shot at his brother, and it's more in a way it's more damning than anything he says before that. It's quite striking. So again, we see the impact it's having on them, and that, after the Roman situation, but it's still, someone needs to give a counterpoint, and that ends up being Kendall. Now, the thing with Kendall is, like, even as I mentioned, he uses the word brute. He acknowledges the brutal and hard man his dad could be. He instead focuses on the accomplishments, how he built things, buildings, corporations, life itself, he points to. It becomes kind of yet again, at least a second, if not third time this season, in a weird way, it becomes a shining moment for Kendall. It's much the opposite of what his younger brother did. It's clear he's, much like Roman had intended himself, he is now casting himself in his father's image. Which is just kind of funny. Like, wow, that's what Roman was aiming to do, but it's actually Kendall who does it, who, with a few not so subtle lines in his mostly improvised speech, he kind of has a somewhat subtle way of making it about himself, but it's there's a very canny, savvy way he does it, and it's like, okay. What Kendall shows here is an ability that he doesn't always possess to the best degree, but he did pull it off at the Living Plus thing, and now he does it again. Able to think on his feet and go, and not be thrown off the way, say, his brother was just moments earlier.
Oh yeah, he does have the ability to see an opportunity. And to seize it. And I think part of what's helped him is what I'll call the George Bush game of expectations, in that in previous seasons he has failed and people knew he failed. And so a lot of people lowered their expectations of him. Mm-hmm. And unlike Roman, who they don't even take serious, Kendall, there were people who thought he was capable of stuff. And Logan had communicated his belief that Kendall was capable at some level. And the fact that he lowered those expectations in previous seasons means now when he pulls off something like this, people are surprised by it. They weren't expecting it because he'd failed previously. So it comes off as a glorious triumph. But it does show he has the capacity to do those things, to adjust, and to go up in a room full of, probably some of the most powerful people in the world, and certainly the future president, to seize that opportunity. And again, like in Living Plus, like hit a home run when nobody even knew he was coming up to bat.
Right. I mean, think about it. I mean, before I move on, I mean, after all the eulogies are given and they're walking down the aisle, the reactions he gets, and not just Mencken like reaching over and shaking his hand. I noticed if you watch it, Madsen pats him on the back.
Yep.
Which was like, oh wow, that did not. It's a little thing. It's quick. They don't linger on it all, but I noticed it when I rewatched it again. I did actually watch this episode more than once, like you did with the previous one, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting because he's not, Madsen hasn't shown himself to be the most empathetic person, but it's kind of, and I was watching they show at least one reaction shot during like, he sees what he's doing, like, and what it tells him, he's formidable. It tells him that he's formidable. He's someone to be taken seriously, which maybe he didn't as much before, like when they met back in, was it Norway, Sweden, wherever the heck it was, I can't remember right now. But,
Iceland, one of those.
Whatever. At the retreat. Okay.
When he's walking out, it was very reminiscent to me of like the president leaving the house after a good State of the Union speech. Like, walking down the aisle and everybody is shaking hands and wanting to be there and close to him because he has just contained the room. And, a triumphant moment that really fuels him to, go even further in his dad's footsteps.
Right, absolutely. So then we get to the third PLV perspective, so to speak, and that's Shiv. Shiv, of the three, clearly gives the briefest of takes. Honestly, I'll say when she was going to take the stage, I did kind of wonder, wait, is Connor going to get kind of irked? He was told he couldn't speak, but all three siblings at some point did get a shot at the podium. Although I think Connor's concession speech, or whatever you want to call that bit of insanity he blathered on about an ATN in the previous episode, maybe Connor shouldn't be allowed near any podiums anytime soon. But anyway, in the moment, Shiv decides, I love the little reference she says that, by the way, I like these little comments that happen before or after some of their speeches. The one that we kind of skipped over that I kind of wanted. I love that Ewan gives that whole thing, which is very dramatic and serious, and almost cast a little bit of a pall over the whole proceedings, because like no one expects someone to go up there and kind of blast the person who's in the casket. But give a shout out to Armstrong and the writers, whatever. The little comment that Greg makes to him, like kind of saying, kind of a great takedown or whatever it is he said to him. And I was like going, oh my God, Greg. Anyway, back to Shiv. She gathers herself and she shares a childhood memory. Here we go, another memory involving childhood. But hers underscores just how terrifying their father could be to them, as well as she gets into how Logan had his issues with women, which goes directly to how difficult she felt it was to be his daughter. By the way, I'm going to put things on pause. I'm going to go on a mini tangent here. How great was that little scene or scenes, whatever, that involved Logan's women? Mentioned it before. You got Marsha's temporary acceptance of Carrie, which was very unexpected, but kind of like, I wouldn't say tear-inducing, but kind of, oh. And then you've got, his first wife, who we can call Lady Caroline, and her version, quote-unquote, of Carrie, whose name is Sally Ann. And what may very well be the most fun bit of stunt casting in the entire series that I know of. The woman playing Sally Ann, the first wife's Carrie, that's Brian Cox's actual wife, Nicole Ansari Cox, which is amazing. Now it's become a thing. I'm going to give them a shout out. I was alerted to this by friends of me and friends of the podcast. I'm going to call them by their last name in this one. I'm not going to freak out. The Cullens. They had sent me a Huffington Post article that acknowledged that. And since I'm mentioning them and I'm talking about the funeral, and I seem to enjoy, I don't know which I enjoy more. Going on about me being right about something ahead of time, or having to admit when I'm wrong about something. And, they've known me for a while, so I think they enjoyed finding this article and sending it to me. This was aimed at my misguided belief that I discussed in our previous podcast uh, about the likelihood of Brian Cox appearing in this episode, and the thing I was hanging on the rim about. Well, but they caught images and photos and video of him, being around the filming of the funeral thing. Well, that was deliberate. Apparently he showed up at the filming of this episode, and it was actually to throw people off. They were originally going to film a fake scene, but they simply ran out of time. But he did make absolutely sure that paparazzi would catch shots of him arriving, and that was certainly going to be enough to kind of, because no one knew what was going to happen at this point in the season. They see him showing. So if he's showing up at the funeral, it can't be his funeral. So that was all on purpose. It reminds me of the bullshit Dallas would do back in the 80s just to throw off the National Enquirer, except now, it's kind of the same kind of a thing. So I was wrong again. And, they were the ones to send me the article and made me laugh. I was like, okay, I'm definitely got to mention that on the podcast, whatever. You should have seen people fighting with me on Twitter about, I brought up the whole Tom's gonna die theory, and they're all ripping me apart. I said, I didn't say he's gonna die, I just said it's 50-50. Maybe he's so tired because he's working and they make him boss. I don't know. Maybe he ends up on the throne, or maybe he dies, or maybe he dies on the throne. I don't know. Throne being the throne, a throne being a toilet. I don't know. Anyway.
He did say they did talk about him being tired again in this episode.
I know. I do wonder by them mentioning it that many times, it almost feels like there's a red herring at work here. We shall see. Anyway, back to Shiv's little scene, because she ends it with asserting, and you have to think, is she trying to convince herself or everyone else that they're okay? And it's interesting because each person's turn at the pulpit is moving in a different way and to a different degree. And they all, like I said, they all offer a different facet, a different side, but they also all share the same thing. And it's interesting because the thing that they all share is essentially negative. And that's something you don't generally see at a funeral. Unless you're burying someone, in Potter's Field, you don't usually see that happen. I just was very taken by that.
Yeah, and if you put them all side by side, the thought I had was the only one that really seems to be dealing with his death appropriately is Kendall. I think Kendall has, at least in the moment, and when he's needed, stepped up and put Logan's death in context. Shiv and Roman clearly haven't. And I think you pose exactly what Shiv is doing, and that is sort of trying to convince herself, because we later see her ask Carl, and Frank, was my dad a good man? And, and they do what any person would in that situation. When you see somebody desperate, they clearly, oh yeah, he was as good as he could be for what he was. Like, just try to give her a word of comfort, but clearly don't want to answer the question honestly.
Right. It was that's where I took your introduction from today. Frank, I think Frank calls him a salty dog, but he was a good egg, and Carl kind of agrees with him. The best part about that, there's something very kind of weirdly sweet about Shiv asking a question like that. But it's when she walks away, they kind of look at each other, and Frank is like, that was right? Like, yeah. Yeah. I really thought that was kind of like interesting. Like, okay, did we say the right thing? Do we agree? Was that really true? Yeah, sure, sort of. Okay. Just give me a second here. Where was I going on? So I'm looking at the episode. It's an extra long episode. In a lot of ways, it kind of felt like we got two episodes that got smashed together. When you get to the moment at just before that, actually, when we're still at the church, when people are filing out of the church, and that's when Hugo shares that little piece of information with Kendall about the the latest ploy that Shiv and Madsen have cooked up to win over Mencken, essentially. Especially this is just moments after he was sitting next to her in their grief. And, I don't remember. I think looked like he might have put his hand on her leg or something, showing brotherly concern and whatnot. And this is right after, Kendall, as I was just saying, he was feeling that there was that moment of victory where, he's being clapped on the back by different people, where it wasn't simply that, sorry about your dad. It was also, they were impressed with what he just did. Because what he did, when his brother melted down and he just did an impromptu eulogy, I know a little bit about something about giving an impromptu speech. Thing, but that was a wedding, not a funeral, so it's a much more dire circumstance. But when that happens, and when he's told that, and the look on his face where he's kind of like, slightly stunned, just kind of like taking it in, and it kind of undercuts everything we just saw, that's a spot, normal circumstances, boom, that's the end of the episode. Credits start to roll. But then you realize, oh, wait. You're watching on HBO Max or Max, and next year this could be called Ma, and then or maybe X, but then Pornhub. Anyway, so then you pause it, was like, oh wait, there's like another 20 minutes. What the hell? Because there's two more significant components to the episode. We've got the actual interment of Logan Roy, and then the gathering that happens afterwards. Two other major set pieces. The second one where everyone's trying to curry favor with the presumptive president-elect. So, Brian, I'm thinking, and again, we can bounce back to things that we skipped over. I don't expect us to go over every minute of the goddamn episode, but if there's things, I know there's things that we kind of just like bounced around because, we're doing that. I want to hit the cemetery. And with everything that happened there, because the cemetery scene, a lot of that, I like the fact there's a significant amount of little sprinklings of humor there, which we don't, and almost like a release of the tension and pressure from that had happened at the church. And it's also what they say and how they say it and where they say it is very telling. So if you want, I don't mind ceding the pulpit to you for a moment if you have any observations about it. Otherwise, I'll just do a rat-a-tat-tat through it myself.
No, I like I like sort of them reminiscing about their dad but sort of laughing at the absurdity of this structure.
Yes.
And how, ridiculously big it was, and the joke, like that basically bought it from, what was it, like dogfood.com or something, the person who owned dogfood.com or some pet food.
It was like it was an internet pet thing. So then she uses a line like something like cat food Ozymandias.
Yes.
It's like Ozymandias. They got in a reference to it anyway.
Yeah, I love that.
I like the little things like, 5 million. Oh, good deal. And because he said it seriously. Oh, it's a good deal.
Yeah.
It's a resident. It's a residence. It's a tax write.
Yeah, and I have to give a shout out. I don't remember the person that posted the article, but I saw the article that mentioned that 5 million is a callback to what Greg would have gotten from Ewan. And that was back when, he was trying to consider whether to go with them or stay with Ewan. And there was some talk about $5 million. And at that time, the kids, that was the scene where they said, oh, I'd rather be poor than have 5 million, because 5 million is just, it's terrible.
That's right.
So that was a callback to that specific amount. So I saw that. I thought it was interesting, but I like that Kendall hears from Hugo what happens. They go there and he doesn't play his hand, and there is this sort of humor. There's this sort of everybody processing it, and then they walk inside, and it's funny. Like, you can tell none of them want to be buried there, and there's all the
except for Connor. Connor
Well,
wants
except for Connor,
top
yes.
bunk.
Top bunk. Yeah.
But what I love about that moment, when the idea is broached about the idea of any of them being interred there as well, Kendall makes a joke about he couldn't even share a glass of scotch with the man or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's what Roman, we notice, does not enter. He stays at the
Yes.
doorway, which is very telling. And we always talk about it's the briefer, the shorter lines that seem to have the most power. There's a line that Marcia has shortly thereafter, which I think qualifies for that as well. But I think it's what Roman says, which is it's a very interesting line. I didn't write it down, but I think I remember it. I think he says something like, he made me breathe funny. Do you remember that? And I just took what I thought that to mean. Because we know about how he treated him at one point in his life. There was abuse, supposedly. We just saw him sobbing and squealing like, the way he was, whatever. So you can imagine either he's referring to a form of, being a fear, a form of hyperventilating, whatever it was, or just made him just like the nerves and tension he felt around his father as a child. And the way he would phrase it, like, he made me breathe funny. Kind of like that to me, that's some of the lines that made me kind of go, oh man, as bad as I felt about him, what happened at the church, that was just one more thing. So like I said, it's interesting in a scene that each little line seems to be humor, but then the humor starts to ebb away until we get to his line, which is like, there's nothing really funny about what Roman says there. But it's a great little sequence.
It's interesting. That makes me think, of comparing Shiv to Ewan, that Ewan told about her and Logan and how their life, how things came about as kids. And you play that out into Logan's life, and it gives you some context and meaning for why Logan was the way he was. But Shiv talking about them hanging around outside his office for his attention. Mm-hmm. And the one thing they were afraid of is, if they got too loud or something happened, he would come out and storm out and terrify them.
Right.
That's sort of there, crossing the Atlantic in a passenger ship with no engine. What do we talk about? Like, all of them just want his attention and love, and they were so desperate for it, they sat outside his office door and played, just to try to get him to shine. I think Roman said one time, or I don't remember if it was Roman or Kendall, said, like, when he shines his light on you. Maybe it was Shiv that said that. It was Shiv, wasn't it?
It was Shiv.
Yeah, it said like there's something about when he shines his light on you, you feel like the most important person in the world.
Yeah, it was just, the light was so warm.
Yeah, that. But you see the trauma he impacted on each of them in that moment, but it's dealt with in a comic way in those little ways. But like you said, Kendall and Shiv are more joking. Roman throws that out, but he's still not okay.
No, he's absolutely, it's only going to get worse, as we mentioned earlier. So we don't have to mention it again. The other noteworthy thing beyond, because we already mentioned the opposite, they sit there through the little procession, and we had the moment between Shiv and Frank and Carl, and we also have that moment with Kendall talking to Hugo about, okay, now he's got to put a plan into action. I kind of enjoy the way he talks to Hugo, because it harkens back to when he kind of, got the goods on him with that whole phone call thing he had overheard. But I love it, like, and he does this throughout the episode. Like, come work with me. He's again assuming his father's position. When he talks to the guy who used to be Colin, the security person later on, which we'll talk about, which is kind of interesting the way he goes about it. But here with Hugo, he makes it clear. No, we won't be collaborating. You're going to be my dog, but you're just going to get the scraps, but the scraps will be millions. And I love Hugo, just no pride, woof, woof. And again, it's millions. And you just brought up the fact that they had said in another episode, I'd rather be poor than just have 5 million.
Yeah.
So it shows what kind of levels we're dealing with here.
Yeah, and there's something really charming about the sort of trollery of Hugo. That he's almost like Dr. Frankenstein's helper. He's almost like an Igor this season, and he's going to be Kendall's Frank or Carl if Kendall ascends in a weird way, or maybe he'll be like Kendall's Michael Cohen, to use a contemporary example. But
yeah, that would make sense because I think Kendall would hope. My feeling is if in a perfect world for Kendall, he keeps Frank, but he'd try to get rid. I think he would want to get rid of Carl.
Absolutely,
that's the way Carl is. By the way, am I not mistaken that when Kendall lays into Roman later on, I'll just mention it right now because it just popped into my head. He's kind of quoting Carl's analogy about dicks in hands and such, and we're going,
yeah,
wow, you're riffing on what Carl said. Like, all right, not the most original, I don't know, but okay. So let's get to that whole stretch of scenes because it's all at the gathering later on. This is when everyone's trying to win favor with Mencken, because this is all basically setting the stage for the battle that's been brewing since the start of the season, which is Shiv versus Kendall. But before that, we also get, and in the midst of all this, we also get, that scene that we talked about, another scene between Shiv and the Always Tired, because, we think he's going to have a heart attack or end up in a coma, Tom. But it's the scene with Mencken is fascinating because it's what Severance does so well. It veers from serious to ludicrous in like 0 to 60 because, Kendall starts off. He's trying to do his thing. He's trying to talk man to man to the guy who's about to be crowned president of the United States, and then, much to his annoyance, he's practically lumped in with the idiocy of his cousin and his older brother, who are completely stepping on his face-to-face time with Mencken. Keeping in mind this is a guy whose time is clearly going to be both rare and fleeting to be able to talk to anybody because he's about to. At least as far as this episode is concerned, he's about to be president. So I thought that was amazing. And then in comparison, you get the extraction team of one, Shiv, who along with Mattson, they come off in their conversation being far more level-headed and far less desperate. They're not awkwardly trying to call in a favor with no leverage, which is what Kendall's really problem is right now. They're simply trying to make sense in a way that would appeal to someone like Mencken, even while being aware and acknowledging their differences. But at the end of the day, there is a way to compromise here that, both can walk away from it feeling okay about it.
Yeah. Yeah. The menace in Mencken, at this point, I mean, it's no surprise this guy would welch on a deal and be a scumbag, but the sort of the evil he portrays this is where I think you made the joke earlier. He calls Roman the Grim Weeper.
Yep.
And talks about his tiny tears. Mm-hmm. Kendall's playing an interesting game. And I think a point I'd like to go back to too is when he talks to Colin. I think the car crash is in his head.
Oh, it's not just that the car crash is in his head when it comes to Colin. And it was around that time and afterwards, there were scenes with Colin where Colin clearly disrespected him.
Well, I mean, Kendall, at one point, I remember Colin said menacingly, and, another one of those short bits of dialogue that mean a lot is at one point when there was something going on, Colin looked at Kendall and said, "I know you."
Yes.
Which told a lot. But, Kendall does mention to Colin that he knows he's been seeing a shrink.
Oh, he makes a big show about it. Really.
Yeah.
Because he makes it like, it's almost like everybody, we're all talking about it. We all know he is what Kendall is doing. Again, I gotta say, is he doing things that I wouldn't think Logan would do? Of course not. I think it's Logan playbook stuff. He's on one hand he's offering a lifeline to someone while he's still tearing them down because he's making them feel that much smaller or making himself feel bigger as a result of it, because where else are you going to go?
Well, it's the implicit threat. Like, I'm tearing you down. Here's your lifeline. If you don't go with me, you're going to drown. And
right.
I read an interesting recap. And one person posed the idea that if Kendall makes the complete turn and say he's the victor, that really what the funeral was the funeral for his soul. That what we like that's good about him, that he'll suppress all that in the final episode, and we'll know that in that moment where he saw the opportunity, he took it and gave up the things that we've clung to that we find likable about him. And I think that's very possible based on the way that this episode ends. Now, as we've talked about before, this show surprises us. It wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't win, but they seem to be pointing hard that he's going to. But what is winning if you've got to carry water for a Mencken? You have no friends, no family. And I think, the scene where somewhere in this episode, I mean, I was absolutely horrified at how he acted with Rava and the kids.
Yeah. Early in the episode, before, when she's taking them like upstate or something and not taking them to a funeral. Not that I always think it's not that many people often don't like taking children to funerals anyway, but it's lifting off from the previous episode about all the havoc and what's been going on in the streets, and she's not wrong, but it's a mildly disquieting scene at the very least. He doesn't take it to the extremes that he threatens to at that moment. He doesn't actually stand in the way of the car or lie in the street or anything, but he is going a little bit over the edge, and the fact that he wants to, that makes him want to pursue custody, as he says to his assistant Jess a little bit later. And then there's that whole scene with Jess, the assistant, and it's fascinating because he notes the thing in his calendar that, I have a meeting with you on like next Monday or Tuesday. So what's this about? And she obviously knows what it's about. And she keeps trying to, deter him from talking about it. Like, no, we'll talk about, because what date it is. And he insists on her explaining what it is. And of course, what it is that she's going to be, giving in her notice. And because obviously she doesn't want to be connected to this whole Mencken situation, because if he represents what we've been led to believe he is, perhaps, and correct me if I'm pretty sure Jess is a woman of color, probably not someone who would be on board with someone who supposedly, has far right-wing fascist leanings as they've conveyed on this show. And then he erupts at her. And he continues.
I mean, he pulls a Logan. I mean, it's Logan.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
hey, tell me, answer this question. And if you don't answer the question, he berates you for not answering it. But if you answer it and he doesn't like your answer, he berates you for that.
And how dare you bring this up? How dare you tell me this on this day of all days when you're
right.
working with me? Yeah, it's almost the structure of that moment is just like, so wow. That doesn't make you very likable, dude.
No.
So we also, I referenced it, but I wanted to go back to it a little bit here. Because I think we felt especially after the scene in the America Decides episode, we probably thought there wasn't going to be a possibility of there being any form of compassion whatsoever in any future scene between Tom and Shiv. So again, wrong. And the fact that in that scene between the two of them, which starts off with, I love the thing where she defiantly is drinking the champagne, and we all know what that means, and his reaction, like, and the way she does it is like, yeah, that's right, I'm going to do this, that's right, because, I mean, you could have had a boring line where she would have said, you can have the occasional, and you'll be fine. No, that's not good writing. What they do here, just the look on her face, is like, yeah. Brilliant. But him breaking down, and he, not to the extent of Roman, but he does actually start to sob. Maybe it's not clear to everyone else there, like Roman at the church, but it's like going, oh my God, has this dude really not gotten any sleep? Because he's losing it, whatever. And you see there is still at least there's still humanity there. She has not lost her soul as of yet, and she offers him, the access to their apartment. I love him making it come like everyone at the hotel knows him and he hates it because his pictures be gone everywhere, and now we know who people, if they see him, like, oh, that's the guy who helped make Mencken president, is the way, and and in New York City, you're going to be public enemy number one, for something like that. So I really kind of enjoyed that whole thing. And yes, and my thought in my head was like, oh no, what if he dies in his sleep? And then I don't know if I'll just be disappointed in that, or I'll be annoyed that Brian actually was right about that.
Well, what I like about it is, again, it's one of those subtle turns that we've talked about, that you expect there to be no warmth between them at all after what happened, and there is. And it makes us care about her and him. And even if maybe they shouldn't be together, there is a chemistry that we like between the two of them not being awful to each other.
Right. Oh, I love the moment that her when her mother in between him, but all the stuff with her mother, like react again when earlier in the episode when her mother kind of figures out that she's pregnant, and again, it's not said, but it's brilliant because it's not said. It's like, wait, yeah, what? Yes, yeah, oh.
Yeah.
And then the whole awkward congratulations. See, even though none of them act like it's awkward, which is really fascinating, actually. And I think Tom drops a line, which is like really like, whoa, that's really kind of, wow. Like, what is it he says? He says something, I can't remember. God damn it. It's I should have written it down. He basically, he has a line which is basically reacting to the overall situation, which is basically saying, yeah, it's pretty fucked up that now she's pregnant right when we're Splitsville, and so what the fuck can you do? That's not what he says, obviously. He actually comes up with something else.
I don't remember the specific line, but I remember what you're talking about. And, I'm as curious as to what happens to them and the child as to what happens with Kendall, because they've really done an interesting job of bouncing them off each other this season.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of curious about where every character goes on this show. It's one of the things I really like about this, even compared to some of my all-time favorite shows, like I've said many times in the past, like Mad Men is like my number 2 or 3 favorite show of all time. But when Mad Men was getting towards the end, I wasn't concerned about every single character that was on the show as much as I was about a few specific ones. I mean, I was kind of interested, but not that. I was like, okay, blah, blah. This one, I'm very curious about several characters and where they end up. By the way, I don't know where I read it or heard it. I don't know if it was, I don't think it was in one of those tail end things on HBO Max or Max. Again, I keep forgetting it's on HBO Max. Can't call it that anymore. Or if it was something I read or heard somewhere else. And it kind of goes back to being me making the wrong call about Logan showing up. And I can't remember where I read this or heard it. Maybe you heard it. So, something that they've never done on the show. And I didn't realize that. And we've got only one episode to go, and I don't think they'll change it now. There's never been a flashback on this show. They've never. Think about that. They've never. And the article was like, it wouldn't make sense to have because I think it was about Logan showing up in the episode. I think maybe I read that somewhere and talking about being. It's like, but they've never done they've specifically never done a flashback on the show, so it would be weird to suddenly do one now. And I went, wait, there's never been a flashback. And I kept thinking about it. I was like, oh shit, I don't think there has ever been a flashback on the show. We've never seen, here they are, like 10 years earlier, or when they were, the credit sequence, which we've had there are many debate whether it's actually them or not. I know they're presenting in the ads like it's them. I still say it's stand-ins for them. I don't really, because they're not the same kids in all the little clips, whatever. It's like, wow. But just from a storytelling point of view, I found that to be very interesting, because most shows that we've watched at some point do resort to a flashback. Now, in terms of screenwriting, there are those who say, and I'm going back to my old screenwriting classes now, there are some writers who don't like flashbacks because they think flashbacks are lazy. That it's like, if you can't tell your story in present time, that means there's a problem with your story, that you have to go back and tell something from the past that you can't. And again, and my reaction to that, really? Because there's this little movie called Casablanca, which has a great extended flashback right in the middle of it. Kind of a good movie. And wait, you know what? Citizen Kane, the entire movie is comprised of flashbacks. So basically, 2 of the 3 greatest movies of all time. I was like, but they're like, shut up, Scott. What do you know? I was like, I know a lot. Anyway. But I thought it was...
Not to mention Godfather 2.
Yeah, there you go. See, 3 of the top 4 or 5. Anyway, Jaws. Wait, no. Remember when Jaws is like just a little teeny tiny fish? Anyway, so he's a guppy. But I just thought it was interesting. I was like, wow, that's interesting. And then I realized, and I think we just didn't think about it that way, because the whole thing when, an episode or 2, whatever it is, after Logan's death, when we were watching him film the filming of the commercial. Well, that's not a flashback. They're watching video footage. And it's like, that's how they got away with having a quote-unquote Logan flashback without it being a Logan flashback. It was literally watching a video that he had recorded, whatever time before. So if they stick to that rule, therefore the only way Logan should show up, if you're going to give Cox another minute on the show, is if there's some other pre-recorded thing somewhere. And I kind of think they wouldn't do that, because we've already had one. So I guess, another check mark, and Scott was wrong for this podcast. I now don't think he's going to show up again. Watch they do a flashback.
I don't either. And we're almost done. So if you're almost done, there's a question I want to ask you.
The only other thing I wanted to say, because we're just wrapping up the episode. We already kind of talked about what happened at the episode with Roman earlier. I do think it's interesting that what Kendall is doing is he's really, throughout the last 20 minutes of this episode, as I said before, the way I look at it, he's getting his ducks in a row. And what he does with Roman, when I talked about, it's kind of it's quick, cutting, and mean, and it's almost done with such disregard. Like he's apologizing and ripping his brother at the same time. He's asserting his dominance like their father did. He's really doing that in such a way where it's going to make it easier. At least he's thinking it's going to make it easier for his brother to fall in line with him in their upcoming battle against Shiv, and that's what I think he's doing there. And then we see the rest of the episode end with Roman in the streets of New York, which is basically an average night in New York. No, I'm just kidding. Some would have you believe it is. It's not that bad here. Everyone who says it, except for the rats, it's not that bad here. Anyway, come on.
Oh, I think him even referencing, Roman's deviance is definitely invoking their father.
Oh, yeah.
Because Kendall has never really attacked him beyond being stupid in the moment. He's never attacked his other pathos. And but their dad always did. It's, again, Kendall calling back to Logan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that again, if it's the fall of Roman, it's at least to some degree the ascension of Kendall, because they kind of switch places by when we go from the end of last episode to the end of this episode. They have essentially kind of switched places, except at the end of the previous episode, we thought the world was at their feet because they thought they had the Mencken deal sewn up, and now we realize, okay, this is gonna have to be a battle. It's gonna back to the board. and something along those lines, I guess.
Right, and Roman basically exiles himself at the end.
Yeah, pretty much.
So before we go on, I want to ask you a question.
Go for it.
It was reported this week, Brian Cox said he thought they killed Logan too soon. And I just want to say, before I ask you your opinion, I will state my opinion.
Okay.
My opinion is he's wrong. And here's why I believe he's wrong. For us to be invested in the battle of these kids, he needed out of the way. He was too big a presence. His presence still lingered over the season in the way it should have. But we needed to see all of them without him go on this journey and become the trio, split up, make their moves. I think we needed to see their journey without him lingering over it or interfering in it. And I have been happy with the journey they've taken us on with the three of them. And we've even referred to them as the trio. And how much we liked seeing them all together at the beginning of this season, at the funeral, at the things that have occurred. So while I miss him and it would have been great with him, I don't have any complaints. And I think that saying they killed him too soon may be his opinion, but I don't think for me that he's right.
I can understand why he would say that. I mean, obviously it's the role of a lifetime, and it would have been probably more fun for him to have a further involvement in future episodes, and maybe to look at it that way. And one could make the case that maybe you could have gotten away with having him die maybe a couple episodes later, perhaps, maybe at the midpoint of the season as opposed to episode 3. I'm probably going to have to, I'll put it this way. I will slightly more than mildly disagree with Mr. Cox. Only because we've 9 episodes. The weakest, and by weakest, I mean, it's, a B plus or A minus compared to some of the others of the episodes is probably the second episode of the season, maybe, which I still liked, but, a lot. But it's the one that's in between the debut of everything, which kind of lays the groundwork for the season, and the third episode, which, is just, rocks our world and shatters everything by killing Logan. And every episode after that has been, and I've used this bad pun joke before, so I apologize for doing it again, has been a succession of episodes that have built on one another. And I think in many ways it's gotten, beyond, once past the third episode of him dying, which it stands on its own, but then the rest kind of keep building up until we got to this funeral episode, which again, it's almost too much of an episode. But it works. It works in the same way, like, wow, this is the week I use weird analogies. I used a weird one in the Scott Forgot the 80s podcast that I recorded a couple of days ago. Wait till you hear that one. And now I'm going to use a weird one here, just again, off the top of my head. In some ways, this episode is like the White Album. Because I don't think the White Album is the Beatles' best album. Right? There are people who do, and it's not, and then I don't know, you pick whatever album you want. But the White Album, it's huge because it's a double album. I've often said, I actually angered some people who are Beatle fans, which is funny because I'm the biggest Beatle fan I know, and it's me. It's like, first of all, if you took that and made it into 2 albums, and you did some judicious editing, you would have 2 of the greatest albums of all time. Period. Instead, you have it's still a great album, but I'm sorry, it's probably for most Beatle fans that I know, if I asked them, give me your top 3 Beatle albums, it's probably not in their top 3. You make those 2 separate. Now, this episode, I think it's a great episode. Could you have chopped this into, here's a funeral, this episode is mainly about the funeral, and this is the episode about everything else? You could have done that. there's still some, I'm sure there's stuff on the cutting room floor. I bet they filmed, an extra 15, 20 minutes of this episode, if not more, if not an extra hour. It's still, I think, one of the best episodes of the season. I don't think it's the best episode of the season, and some of it's because it's what's the phrase people use? It's almost overstuffed.
Yeah.
And it was weird but I think it's like, okay, it's the penultimate episode. Let's get everything in here. And we need all the emotion of this. We need the fall of this, and we need to set the stage in a big way for the final episode, which is what the point of most penultimate episode is supposed to do. Well, I keep saying that word now. So I really liked it, but could you have done all this if you kill Logan a few episodes later? I don't think you can. There's no fat in the episodes preceding this. This is, to me, because we keep dealing with episodes that deal with mainly one location. Episodes that have a certain. I don't think I've heard people in the past have referred to Succession as a slow show, which makes zero sense. I've heard that about shows over the years, like everything from Mad Men to Sopranos, which I can understand it with some of them. I don't agree, but I understand. Succession is it's a dialogue driven, but it's fast dialogue. It's whip smart, and it cuts here to here to here. It is not a slow show. And I don't think there's any scenes that we've watched in these episodes that make it, we didn't need that. We didn't need that. And it's excellent because unlike a show that we love, like a Breaking Bad, for example, which is, I know, a show that everyone that's listening to the podcast is probably a huge fan of, like myself. Although there may be the occasional dots of humor here and there, they tend to be few and far between. They tend to be if a character is comical, if back in the day, if Saul Goodman is comical in a scene, or Badgers, and there might be, if it's a bottle episode, like, 4 days out between Jesse and Walt, there may be some comedy to be driven there, but generally it's more plot driven and not comedic in that sense. Succession has to take the time to have a considerable amount of humor throughout it. It's rare that there aren't scenes where there isn't at least something to make you laugh or smart, which I think just makes it transcend a lot of other shows, a lot of other HBO classic shows as well. So they're really working on so many different levels. It's what makes, the more I've watched it, the more impressed I've become by it, because they're pulling off a lot and they're taking risks. It's a show that, as I said earlier, doesn't worry about whether you're going to like these characters, because you're going to be so fascinated by them. You're going to get sucked into their world anyway. And you know what? Along the way, you may end up finding yourself liking characters after all. You may end up finding yourself rooting for characters after all. You may end up changing your mind about characters after all throughout the course of the show. And I think that's what makes it a really exceptional show.
Well, I think the most important piece, and I'll end with this, is that Roman's journey loses a lot of its heft if Logan lives longer than he lives. And you go to Iceland, you go, the scene on the mountaintop with Madsen, and his ultimate crash. And I think we forget sometimes, we talked about this a couple episodes ago, that really this whole season has sort of taken place over like a week, like 10 days, a couple of weeks, because, Logan dies in episode 3. In episode 9, we're having a funeral.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what I would cut out just to have Logan around for a little bit more. So I especially because one of the big stories this season has been like Kieran Culkin really raising his game. Like, I don't think what he does and has been given the space to do works if Logan lives past episode 3.
Right. Plus, a character like Logan is his impact and and everything about him is pervasive throughout the series. So even with his character having passed away, he's still there. He's still there.
Yep.
And every time you happen to see a picture of him somewhere or a painting or a portrait, it brings it home. But his impact is in, if not every scene, every other scene throughout the course of the series. So that's why you can get away with killing off. Oh, by the way, one other little piece of trivia from that same article, I think it was, where he popped up the day where we're shooting the funeral stuff. He is not actually on the airplane in that scene. That's not Brian Cox at any moment in that episode. That's not. So what you see when you see the flash of someone's head or chest, whatever, that's not Brian Cox. He was never there for any of that shooting. So
interesting.
I thought that was kind of interesting because I kept thinking we never actually see his face, and I kept thinking we see little bits and pieces, but I never actually see anything that really tells me. That's why I kept wondering when I was watching the episode the first time. I was like, wait, is that him? I was like, is this like the weirdest fake out of all time? Like, no, it's supposed to be him, but it's not the actual actor. So there you go. Okie doke. So, with all that said, we've got one other penultimate episode to get to. A considerably briefer episode. So it's got that going for it. And much like I wouldn't mind having after we finish recording tonight, it's a nice meal. The penultimate episode of Barry. Barry, much even more so than Succession, is a risk-taking show, and they've certainly done that this final season where, it's always been a dark show. Sometimes really fucking dark. But I think this episode really works so very nicely because we've already gotten past the quote-unquote polarizing episode from, Tricky Legacies, and we had last week's, which had, some... We got to return with some different characters like Fuchs and Hank and Cousineau, of course, and which kind of like restores a little bit of the structure that we love about the characters of Barry, even if they're all kind of like Succession, not the greatest people. This continues that trend, following the plot lines that we were fascinated by. It does, in beautiful Barry sense, it does throw in some really delightful little bits of dark black comedy, which works so beautifully. A lot of that takes place during stuff that's involving Hank and Fuchs. So I just want to say the 4 boxes scene is one of my favorite scenes I've seen this year of anything. And the gag, the joke, the look, when you have the 4 boxes, which are clearly the bottom of each one is clearly saturated in blood. And we know what they are. And Hank knows what they are. It's like, he's like, oh, that's obviously his fault. And he starts opening them. It's like, go ahead. And there's a certain part, I think when he gets to the 3rd one, maybe, it's like, why do I keep opening? And I couldn't stop. I was laughing, and I said, "Oh, I'm laughing out loud at an episode of Barry! Yay, that's good." And then just the ridicule, and again, it's the fact that they can. One of the things I love about Barry, the show, is you can set up a scene that's funny or silly or absurd, and you laugh at it. But there's something also so creative about the staging of it. The entire sequence when they're trying to blow up the house and the gunmen after, the way that's all kind of laid out in front of us, this entire, and how they, and the complication of filming that. And it's so ridiculous, even and it's funny, but it's also, but people are being murdered at the same time. I did enjoy the fact, just getting that out of the way right off the bat. There was definitely a return of humor that I was thankful to see on the show, because yes, I do like the dramatic aspects of the show and whatever, but I do like a little bit of comedy. I don't want to cry at every scene of Ted Lasso either. I want to actually laugh occasionally. Same with Barry. I don't want to be horrified or depressed by every moment. I want to laugh, and I like that this episode did that for me on a number of scenes.
Now, this episode was reminiscent of early episodes of Barry, and it was lighter. It had some heavy stuff interspersed, but I thought it was lighter as a whole, and just the sort of ineptitude of NoHo Hank and his gang, and the idea that the sort of comic thing that I'd reflected on, but not really thought deeply about until this episode, is that early in this show it was joked that Fuchs was the Raven. Mm-hmm. And now he's really become the Raven.
Yes.
That was a joke that he used to pump himself up, and now he really is that person.
All right, everything from what we see him do and act throughout this episode. Oh, by the way, the scene where he and his men are talking to his new lady and her I guess it's her daughter. And this is relating to the atrocities that they had witnessed earlier.
Where they killed the Fubucks.
Yeah.
Fubar with a K.
Yeah, but later on with the scene with Kusanov being confronted by all the different, by Jim and his son and the feds and whatever, and it's what you're saying about they bring up the Raven thing, and Kusanov's the only one who knows, like, but he's not even real. It's like, no, yeah, yes he is. Like, it's like, oh my God, it's kind of this whole unintentional. It's in many ways it's almost an unintentional framing of Kusanov, even though. Well, yes, he did get that money, and he did obviously spend some of it, but he's being painted in this light where, like, oh, he's a co-conspirator to kill his daughter. That's how he's being viewed by Jim, whatever. Jim, who's supposed to be so savvy, yet I kept thinking, wait, you just left him? You don't think he might figure out a way? There's something that you can't see how he might get out of that? That I'll let it go because we have to move on with the episode has to get somewhere. Barry has to get out of there somehow. But I kept thinking, really? He was that Jim seems like such a smart guy in the way he goes about things. That's
leaving the knife on the table bothered me because if there's one thing in this show that because of the comedy, everybody's kind of a boob.
Yeah.
But Jim Moss is portrayed as sort of like the one competent person in this world.
Right, exactly. That was a little. Again, it's something that they got to put that in there because we have to find a way to get out of there. Although Barry passing out in the kitchen from, is it just from the blood loss of his hand, or is he just really tired, or was there a drug involved? Because I can't imagine everything was just based on just a virtual reality thing. I mean, did he put something in him? It was very, and I love that we got. Again, Hader was able to get away with having some weird, surreal moments, but now there's more of an explanation. Like, well, he's wearing these virtual reality things, so things could be weird and strange, like seeing his son standing there and images kind of overlapping one another. Speaking of surreal and weird, I didn't, and I have to admit, because I watched it again just before we started recording. I didn't remember this when I watched it the first time. Maybe I was tired and my eyes didn't register. I didn't notice it. Did you notice the thing with the cop? When Sally is talking to the cop, his eye?
Yeah, that it's bleeding like he'd been shot in the eye.
Okay, so how do you view that? I think there can only be one way it can be viewed, but I wanted to hear what you had to say about it because I literally didn't notice that the first time. I don't know how I missed it, but I noticed it, an hour and a half ago. So.
I think that Sally is so traumatized that it's like some sort of PTSD flashback or something.
Yeah.
And what she's seeing isn't real. It's real to her, but it's some sort of trauma.
I think it's true. Quick question, because I don't remember the circumstances of it, so maybe it's connected to this. Before the 8 years later thing, when there's that episode where she and Barry are being attacked by that guy who's pursuing him, and she's the one who ends up, I think, does she stab him or something? Is it something that happens to the guy's eye? Because I'm thinking maybe what happened to him kind of is mirrored by the cop's eye. I don't remember.
I don't recall, but I would say that's a pretty good guess.
Okay, so I don't know if that's what it was. So if I'm totally off on that, I know she does something to the guy that he steps back. I keep thinking that might be it. It just occurred to me. So, hey, I'll check. I'll find out after we record. If it turns out I was right, Well, yay! And if it wasn't,
Maybe,
oh well, it's just a wacky moment.
maybe the Cullens will send you an article.
You know what? They're paying better attention than I am. You know, I might have to let them take over the podcast. You know what? They probably do it in a much shorter time than I do. That's for sure. So what else we got in this episode? So we've got, well, Barry's been captured by Moss, and we just kind of went through some of that, and it was, I like Hader's like little whispery squealing, but we hear Moss talking to him at the same time. I will confess, I did not remember the 250,000 thing. I totally did not remember that. In fact, I'll be even more honest, I still don't remember it. They talk about it, they show it in that book that Moss has, whatever, and I'm like going, maybe I should have rewatched another episode or two of Barry. I just do not remember this, so I do apologize. This is what we get for only podcasting about a show in its final season, not all its previous ones, because, I didn't commit it to memory. I apologize, but I didn't remember that. But I gotta say, I love the idea of the guy pretending to be an agent from UTA, and I love him first hooking with the Daniel Day-Lewis thing. It's like, he's going to come out of retirement to play a part. And it's like, how does that not appeal to this man's ego more than anything in the world possibly could? But then when they go further, and the idea of it being Mark Wahlberg as Barry, and I thought, whether you're a Wahlberg fan or not, it works whether you're a fan of Wahlberg or not. I was stunned by that, because I'm like, that is so ridiculous, yet such a perfect choice, especially when you think about, how Barry presented himself as an actor in the first place, and then the kind of person or character he is. It's like, oh my God, that's totally Wahlberg. We do want to go the slightly stiff woodenness of, especially when you think about Wahlberg's earlier movies, which he's actually good in, but that was also part of how he plays his roles. And then just the contrast of having someone like Mark Wahlberg and Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, I guess it could work. It's so over the top. I love it. And I'll give them credit, because I'm watching, like, and there's that moment I actually think, oh wait, did they actually get Mark Wahlberg? And then it turns out, obviously, it's just a big scam. Well, and I should have saw that coming, but I was like, I could.
No.
I thought it was going to be him.
Don't discount yourself, because as that happened, what went through my head was, this is a network that had a Mark Wahlberg show.
That's right.
Wahlberg has done HBO.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that's said, my thoughts raced through all that, and I thought, holy crap, that they picked an actor that you reasonably suspended your disbelief and thought, like, when they turn the corner, Mark Wahlberg might be there.
Right.
So I agree with you that was a perfect choice to set the hook in Gene.
And rewatching it, it's when the agent stops before they enter, and he talks about how Mark doesn't like nervous people. I said, that was the scene, that was the moment that totally sold it for me. Like, oh shit, it's Mark Wahlberg. It's like, I love it, because one of the best, half-hour comedy, whatever you want to call it, series is now about to reference what I actually think is one of the worst our HBO comedy series. I am not I did watch a lot of it. I don't remember if I watched. Maybe I watched all of it. I watched Entourage. I watched it the whole time. Oof. Hated all those characters. So yeah. So don't worry, Gene. You got tricked. I know I did too. And it was interesting, because we were talking about, I don't know how I feel about Gene Cousineau at this point, but there was that moment I was like going, oh shit, I don't know if I want him to get railroaded. He actually was horrified and stricken and mourning the loss of his girlfriend. I mean, he is the one who pretty much made it so that Barry would get, captured in the first place. And now it's like, wow, it's just an unintentional, and of course now his son being totally fine, which again, was wrong about that too, Scott. I know that we already established on the previous episode, but it's just a reminder. Oh yeah, and that dude's still alive too. God damn it.
Yeah, but it's like an intervention, but they're all confronting him, and yeah, you have this. I, in a weird way, talking about what you're saying, I had the thought when that all happened that Gene has done a lot of stuff I don't agree with and don't like, but he doesn't deserve that,
Right, right.
and I'll be curious to see how they resolve it because I don't think it's right that Fuchs pays his debt. If Gene has to pay a debt, all these other people have suffered. If Barry gets away scot free, there's something about that bothers me a little bit. Now, I mean, you can argue that he's had to live in exile and all that, but to have everyone else impacted by everything he's done and to not pay some price, um, I don't see it, and I almost wonder, based on what you said earlier, I almost wonder, if the only person to take Barry down is Sally. Um, but who knows?
If someone's going to be responsible for the takedown of Barry of the remaining characters, I would put her number one on the list.
Yeah, me too.
Absolutely. I could just see that happening. I've made this comment before. I don't know if I made it on the I think I made it on the podcast. I know I've made it in real life. I'm trying. I'm probably forgetting something. I'm sure I am. I'm trying to think of the last time I watched a series which is ostensibly a comedy series, with obviously very serious and dark and whatever, but still at the end of the day, comedy series, where you would legitimately have a question of, much like we do about dramatic series, everything from The Shield to Sopranos to Breaking Bad and so on and so forth, or even Lost for that matter, where we can actively go, I wonder if they're going to kill so-and-so.
Right.
This is a show where you feel, oh, is it possible that Barry could die in the final episode? Absolutely. Is it possible anyone else could die? There's at least two or three others that could know how Hank. By the way, how the hell did Hank survive? I thought we ended that moment we seen from far. I thought they were shooting him. They were killing him because Fuchs was just laughing at it. It's like, you're dead, whatever. And somehow he got out of it. Again, we just skipped over that part. I mean, I was glad because he's really he's kind of stealing every moment he's in these last couple episodes. But I kept going, but wait a minute, how the hell did he survive?
He's like a kid. He calls time out.
Yes, and I also love the new plan. Give Fuchs whatever he fucking wants.
Yes, yes.
By the way, this is the most power Fuchs has ever had since probably the very beginning of the series. So it's wow, have tables have turned for that dude. It's amazing. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed the episode. I thought they did a nice job of kind of setting up the finale. The menace of the back of Barry's head is kind of nicely composed, if anything, I guess. I even like the little thing about having, that sports talk stuff, that the TV that was on the whole time. That's all we hear over the final credits, and of course the next on Barry is just the woman he bought the guns from playing Sudoku. Which means someone's going to go in there and find that's where he bought guns. Okay, thanks. So basically, again, meaningless thing. Didn't need that. Whatever. Way to go, you bastards. I wonder if the final episode is going to be a bit longer. So I'm curious about that. I would think it would be. I'd be shocked if it would. But then again, we also have the final episode of Succession, which will air the same damn night. I would think that's going to be longer too.
I would be shocked if we're not watching after 11 p.m. next Sunday.
Yeah,
between the two of them,
I would be shocked as well. I kind of feel, if anything, if this episode we just watched of Barry was an hour and 15 minutes, at least time slot wise, because Barry didn't come on till 10:16. I remember I had to write that down. I was posting threads about it. I would think although you never know. Again. You know what? We can add to the list of things I'll be wrong about. Maybe I'll be wrong about this one too. I suspect it would be just a tad bit longer. Like, not 90, but it might be like 80. I can see it being an 80-minute episode or something like that, And then, you give a minute, boom, boom, boom. Then Barry starts. And I could also see that not maybe being an hour, but it could be in the 40-something minute range. So I kind of think, yeah, I do think it'll just sneak us just past 11. I would be shocked if Barry's like an hour long episode. I would dig it. It will mean that our podcast will probably be 18 hours, but why change now?
Well, let me say my final thoughts on the podcast since we're wrapping up.
Okay.
Here's one final prediction that I feel pretty strongly about. I think the last shot of Succession is going to be the back of Kendall sitting at the head of the table, like they end the credits on the back of Logan.
Oh my God.
If Kendall wins, if Kendall is the successor, he'll be in that seat, and that will be the last shot of the show if Kendall wins. So
that's kind of a prediction, but hedging kind of a prediction.
Right. No. I mean, I'm if I could go on FanDuel and bet that would be my bet.
Okay. What was the show that we watched that they actually made? Oh, I know what it is. It's a show that I watch. I don't remember if you watched The Good Fight. That's right. Where they, at the very last episode, they actually tied in events in the episode to the opening credits, which I personally don't care for.
That everything blowing up?
Yeah, everything blowing up, which is what happens in the episode. And it was done in a way like, oh, it's the opening credits, but saying that, I'm sorry. I don't think it's a bad idea, but it made me laugh when I think of how people kind of like connect the opening credits to the way a show is going to end, because what does my brain go to? Oh, and I'm going to repeat it twice in the same season on the podcast. Oh, kind of like it's Don Draper falling out of a window. That's how they're going to Breaking Bad.
He's going to jump.
He's going to jump, of course. Look, because there's ads, so it's whatever. But then he's going to come back from the dead and then just sit there and smoke a cigarette. Anyway, I'm leery about making predictions. I think some of the things that I've heard theories out there, which I find fascinating that a show like Succession has theories, but indeed it does. I hope the couple that I read on the Twitter are so annoyed me so much. It's like, oh God, please don't be true. I will lose all respect for this series. A lot of them have, well, you know who's going to end up in the big chair or on the throne, if you want to make the Game of Thrones analogy, whatever. It's going to be Cousin Greg. It's like, no, please don't. No. I don't agree with that. I think it would be ridiculous. It sounds too much like Veep. It sounds, or even reminiscent of the dopiness of Game of Thrones.
We don't need Bran Stark on the throne.
Yeah, we don't need a dumb version of Bran Stark on the phone. Throne. All right. That is my signal that I need to start wrapping this up. Okie dokie. If you enjoyed this podcast, you'll enjoy hanging out on our Facebook page as well. It's the Serious TV Drama Podcast page. Like the page, join the conversation about shows like Succession, like Barry, pretty much anything else that's TV related or whatever the hell else you might want to talk about. You can find all of our podcasts episodes, which I believe this makes 381 if I'm not mistaken. You can go to podbean.com, you can type in Serious TV Drama Podcast. You can type in STVD and it'll actually come up. Beautiful. You know where else you can type STVD or Serious TV Drama Podcast? Pretty much most podcast platforms, but if you happen to go to Apple Podcasts, that's a place where you can also rate and review us. I don't mind seeing new ratings and reviews. I think we got a new rating the other day. I was like, oh, look at us. We're talking like 51 now. What else? You can follow us on Instagram one of these days. Hey, apparently I have a little bit more extra time than I used to have as of now. So maybe I'll have some time to finally post some pictures on Instagram, and you can follow those amazing pictures, which are basically the pictures for the podcast. Our handle there is, what is it? Serious TV Drama is one word. Speaking of handles, I always refer to that as Twitter. Follow us on Twitter at STVD podcast. That's STVD as in serious TV drama. Oh, by the way, all those places I mentioned, Podbean and Apple and all those places, you can also find the Scott Forgot the 80s podcast. It's a really cool one, and I'm going to post a new one soon that's based on the movie Excalibur from 1981. I think that's one you can actually listen to and mostly enjoy even if you haven't seen the movie, although you can go spend $3.99 on Amazon Prime and watch the movie first and then listen to the podcast, whatever you want to do. Anyhow, next week, we are going to try like heck to try to record that podcast. In a perfect world, we'll get to it within 24 hours of the finales, if possible. It depends on our lives. It depends on our schedules. As I just hinted at, without getting into any personal details, my schedule has recently become a bit more open than it used to be. But that is the hope, because I would like to be able to get our thoughts and insights and whatever on Succession and Barry too, out there while it's still the hot topic, more so than waiting till release it on a Friday morning. So that's the hope. Yeah, so it'll be like a Memorial Day release. But it's based on whether we have time. Alrighty then. Brian, as always, thank you so much for, again, making time for the podcast and joining me. Your views are always greatly appreciated. Hey, do you know that Dan watches Succession? I didn't know that until earlier today.
Yeah, he talked about watching it this weekend when I saw him.
You know, he kind of hinted at maybe joining the podcast.
So that'd run us from like an hour 40 to an hour 52.
Well, you know, are we including sniffling? No. Anyway, it's 2015 again. I kid one of the co-founders of the podcast. I kid, but he probably doesn't listen anyway. Watch, I get a note from him tomorrow. He listened.
We love you, Daniel.
Of course, he was a very nice man today. Anyway, thank you so much, Brian, for being here. And you can say something or not. I don't care.
Good night. And Scott, take care. I look forward to watching the finale and talking about it next week.
There you go. And thank you all so much for listening. Sorry we ran a little bit longer than normal, but blame me. I'm a little out of it this evening. We will be here next week with what I think will be one of our finest podcasting moments. And by the way, I have no idea what we'll be doing after that one is done. So that'll be something to think about, afterwards. Maybe we'll come up with an idea during that, or, because we got to do something. There's other shows coming on. I don't know. I haven't looked at it. Maybe we'll do, I don't know. I can't think of anything. I'll stop talking. Good night, everybody.
Good night.